Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Monday. Special time, Erev Rosh Hashanah. The new year begins tonight. Very special, very propitious time. Wonderful to be learning right now and setting the tone for a new year that includes, God willing, propitious, what's the word I'm looking for? A lot of Torah learning. Let's light up the darkness. What is that word? Not prominent. Prodigious amounts of Torah learning. Who's in the house on an Erev Rosh Hashanah? Shandora in the Bronx, Guy in Ohio, Joe in the Inland Empire, Gordo in Scotland, Melissa in Great Neck, Yehudit in South Carolina, in Myrtle Beach, Lorraine in Texas, Annette's wishing us shalom, peace, Chaim in Florida, Aoife in Florida, Marie in Freeport, Ella in Southern California, Brandy checking in and saying hello. Welcome, everybody. Okay, we did not quite finish page 7 yesterday, so we're about halfway, not even halfway, near the top, well, maybe a third of the way down, 7b. Our daf today is page 8 here in Tractate Zevachim. The 29th volume of the Talmud. We're talking about the actual ritual of bringing animal sacrifices in the Holy Temple when the temple stood in Jerusalem. We haven't done this in 2,000 years. And that makes it even more important to study these laws and understand them, because that's how we fulfill these commandments now, by learning them. We can't do them, haven't been able to do them in a long time. But what an incredible thing that there is a people that was, whose religious practice was really centered around the Holy Temple. Temple was destroyed by the Romans 2,000 years ago, and here we are still today studying these laws with passion, a people unified by its heritage, by its inheritance, by the Torah that God gave to us on behalf of the whole world. Let's get into it. Like I said, a third of the way down, 7b. We're continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 1 in chapter 1, which is really all about what if an error was made in bringing one of the sacrifices. These are animal sacrifices. So if at the time that the animal was slaughtered, the person slaughtering it had the wrong offering in mind, was slaughtering it for a different kind of offering. There's 6 or 7 different kinds of animal offerings. I don't mean different kinds of animals, different kinds of offerings. The sin offering, the guilt offering, the burnt offering, the peace offering, the thanks offering, the free will offering, which can be a type of burnt offering, and the Pesach that we're going to be talking about today. The Pesach, or the Passover offering, also known as the Paschal lamb. This is an explicit, very explicit, carefully delineated by God commandment in the Torah. And the first time we brought this sacrifice, we were still slaves in Egypt, about to leave. And it was actually a commandment that required tremendous courage and vision and trust to bring that offering, because we were slaves and had been slaves for centuries in Egypt. And now the redemption had begun. We witnessed open miracles known as the plagues, which were very tough on our slave masters, but which, paved the way for the redemption and the liberation of the slaves from Egypt. And then God says, you're going to bring a lamb, right? A lamb. It's usually a lamb. It could also be a goat, a young goat. But the lamb is important here because the Egyptians worshipped sheep, right? They were absolutely an idolatrous people who worshipped all kinds of statues and gods and whatnot. And sheep was one of their important gods. And so to make a sacrifice of a sheep was a major statement. That was a major statement, and they had to have courage to do that. And they did. And then the second time it was brought, right, was now a year later out in the wilderness. And then the commandment was given how it would be done for all time. Now, for all time means as long as we had the holy temple. In the beginning, we had the tabernacle, the sort of temporary movable temple in the wilderness. And for the first 400 years that the children of Israel occupied the land of Israel, the promised land. Then we had the first temple for about 400 years, 70-year exile in Bavel, in Babylonia, followed by another 400-year period, a little bit more, of the second temple period. And then since then, we don't bring the Pesach. All the more important that we study it, right? The Passover offering. Now, what we've been learning is when a mistake is made and an offering is slaughtered, with the slaughter having in mind the wrong kind of offering, that offering remains fit, meaning that it completes its journey, right? The blood is collected, it's sprinkled on the altar. It can be, if it's a burnt offering, it's all going to be consumed by the altar. If it's a peace offering, it's going to be eaten by the owners. But if it was an offering like a guilt offering that was obligatory, or a burnt offering that is obligatory in certain situations, or it became obligatory because a person vowed to bring it, it finishes its journey. It's credited to the owner like he made a gift offering to God, but it does not fulfill his obligation. The exception is the Pesach and the Chatas, the sin offering. And we've been mentioning that law a few times already. It's in our Mishnah. Today we're actually going to prove that about the Pesach and the Chatas, if one slaughters with a mistaken intention at the time of slaughter, either slaughtering it thinking it's a different kind of offering or for a different owner, not only does it not fulfill the obligation of the owner, but you stop the process right there. It does not continue its journey to collect the blood, sprinkle it on the altar, etc. It becomes unfit. And so we cut off that offering. It doesn't get finished. Neither is a gift offering, neither is anything. And we'll see why today. Okay, the Mishnah teaches that all offerings are fit, even if slaughtered not for their sake. Again, fit means finish the journey, but doesn't fulfill obligation of the owner, except for the Pesach and the sin offering, the Chatas. So the Gemara asks, from where do we derive that a Pesach is required to be slaughtered for its own sake? And the Gemara answers, it is derived from a verse, as it is written, quote, observe the month of the spring and offer ve'asita the Pesach. That's Deuteronomy 16:1, teaching that all of the actions, asiyotav, of the Pesach, all of its sacrificial rites must be performed for the sake of the Pesach. And the Gemara asks, we found a source for the law that deviation from the type of offering is prohibited. From where we derive that deviation with regard to the owner is also prohibited. If you had the wrong owner in mind at the time that you slaughtered the Pesach, knowing it was a Pesach, but with the wrong owner in mind, that would also disqualify it and cut it off right there. Can't be used, can't be eaten, can't go forward. The Gemara answers that this is derived from a verse, as it is written, quote, and you shall say, it is the sacrifice, here we're using the word zevach, it is the sacrifice of the Lord's Pesach, Passover, from Exodus 12:27, which indicates that the slaughter, zevicha, right, here the words zevach and zevicha are certainly related, must be performed for the sake of the Pesach. if the verse is not necessary in order to derive the matter of deviation from the type of offering, right? A mistake with intent of what kind of offering it is, as that law has already been derived from Deuteronomy 16:1, as we just said. So we apply it to the matter of deviation with regard to the owner. Having the wrong owner in mind disqualifies it. So the Gemara asks, we found a source for the mitzvah, the commandment, to sacrifice the Pesach for its sake and for the sake of its owner, its actual owner. From where do we derive that these intentions are indispensable? And if lacking, disqualify the offering, right? You might have thought that, okay, that's the way you're supposed to do it, ab initio, but if you did it wrong after the fact, you could still use it. Now we're going to prove that no, you can't, because those intentions themselves are indispensable. So the Gemara answers, the verse states, and you shall sacrifice vezavachta, the Pesach, unto the Lord your God of the flock and the herd. That's Deuteronomy 16:2. So by repeating the mitzvah to sacrifice the Pesach for its sake and for the sake of its owner, the Torah indicates that these two intentions are both indispensable to the sacrificial process. Rav Safra objects to this. Does this verse, quote, and you shall sacrifice, come to teach this law? We need it for something else. It is necessary for the statement of Rav Nachman. As Rav Nachman says, that Rabba bar Avu says, from where is it derived? That a leftover Pesach, an animal consecrated but not ultimately sacrificed on Erev Pesach, is sacrificed as a peace offering, shalamim, afterward, right? So if you set aside a Pesach and then something happened, right? The people didn't bring it. They didn't get to Jerusalem. They didn't get there in time. They weren't able to slaughter that animal that was designated to be a Pesach on Erev Pesach. That's when the Passover lambs and goats would be slaughtered, the afternoon before Pesach begins that night, and afternoon. It had to be done afternoon. By the end of the morning, all the chametz had to be out of the homes. And in the afternoon, they would slaughter the Pesach. And we talked about that in Tractate Pesachim. So if you have this lamb that's designated to be a Pesach, but it wasn't slaughtered in its time, what do you do with it? You can't bring it as a Pesach on some other day. So what you can do now is redesignate it as a shalamim, as a peace offering, and we'll see why. Right? From where is it derived that a leftover Pesach is sacrificed as a peace offering? It is derived from that which is stated, and you shall sacrifice the Pesach unto the Lord your God of the flock and the herd. So the verse is difficult, but isn't a Pesach brought only from the lambs and from the goats, the flock? What does the herd refer to? Cattle don't come from the herd. From here it is derived that a leftover Pesach should be sacrificed as an offering brought both from the flock and from the herd. And what is that? That's a shalamim. You can bring, an ox offering, a cow offering, a bull offering, a calf offering from the herd as a shalamim, but not as a Pesach. So, since that verse teaches something different, we have not yet derived what we do with the leftover Pesach. No, we have not yet derived how we know that the intention has to be correct or it's fully disqualified. So rather, Rav Safra says that the verses should be expounded as follows. The verse, and you shall sacrifice the Pesach, that teaches the statement of Rav Nachman, that a leftover becomes a shlamim. The verse, observe the month of the spring and offer the Paschal offering, the Pesach. This teaches that there is a mitzvah to sacrifice the Pesach without deviation from the type of offering. And the verse, and you shall say, it is the sacrifice of the Pesach, teaches that there is a mitzvah to slaughter it without deviation with regard to the owner. And the term, it is, in the latter verse teaches that both here and there, i.e. with regard to both the offering and its owner, you have to have the correct intention. This is indispensable to the procedure of bringing the Pesach. Now, Rav Safra continues, and we found a source with regard to slaughter, right? Shechting the Pesach. From where do we derive that the other sacrificial rites must also be performed for the sake of the owner, or the offering is disqualified? What's that? Right? Where was the Pesach shechted? In the courtyard of the Holy Temple. And what happened when it was shechted there, when it was slaughtered there? They used one of the temple vessels to collect some of the blood, right? How is shechting done? It's a very sharp knife that makes a very clean cut across the throat of the animal. The animal bleeds out very quickly. It's actually not a painful death at all, if you must die. And some of that blood is captured in the vessel, and then conveyed to the altar, right, and sprinkled on the corner of the altar, right? And as we've learned, it's that sprinkling of the blood that really achieves whatever the intended purpose of the sacrifice is. So what they're saying here is, at the time that you slaughter the animal, you have to have in mind, this is a Pesach, and it's being brought for this group of people, and you have to maintain that same intention for the same people as the blood is collected and as it is sprinkled on the altar. And how do we know that? Boom, boom. So we found a source for the slaughter. From where do we derive that the other sacrificial rites must also be performed for the sake of the owner, or the offering is disqualified, since the Torah revealed that this intention is indispensable to the proper slaughter of the Pesach. It thereby revealed that it is critical to proper performance of all the other rites as well. So Rav Ashi says, we do not say that since the Torah revealed that this law is indispensable to slaughter, it thereby revealed that it is indispensable to other rites as well. We can't extend that proof just like that. Rather, from where do we derive that it is indispensable to the other sacrificial rites? It is derived from a verse, as it is written, "This is the law of the burnt offering, and of the meal offering, and of the sin offering, and of the guilt offering, and of the consecration offering, and of the sacrifice of peace offerings," Leviticus 7:37, indicating that all offerings must, like a peace offering, be sacrificed for their own sake. And here, sacrifice doesn't mean slaughter. We've already covered slaughter, so it must mean the other aspects of the ritual. And it is taught in a Baraisa in the verse, quote, "In the day that he commanded the children of Israel to present their offerings," in Leviticus 7:38, this word, offerings, is referring to the Bechor, the firstborn animal, the animal tithe, and the Pesach, which are not mentioned in the previous verse, right? So we mentioned all the types of offerings that we normally think of as the offerings, right? This is the law of the burnt offering, the meal offering, the sin offering, the guilt offering, the consecration offering, and the peace offerings, okay? But there's other kinds of offerings too, and what are they? The Bechor, right? So if a female animal gives birth to a male as its firstborn, that Bechor gets sacrificed, right? And then the person can keep all the other offspring from then on. The owner can. That's a Bechor. It can be disqualified and then it's not brought. But if it's fit to be brought, it's brought as an offering. The animal tithe, like, so just like we've been talking many times about a farmer in Israel, when the temple is standing, he harvests his produce, right? First 2% goes to the priest. Next 10% goes to the Levite. Next 10% is going to be the Meiser Sheni, which he's going to use for his needs when he goes up to Jerusalem for the festivals, Passover, Shavuos, and Sukkot. But what if he's not a farmer? What if he's a shepherd? Or what if he's an owner of great flocks, like large flocks of animals? Does that mean he doesn't tithe? Au contraire. Yes, he does tithe. And how is the tithing done? 3 times a year, he sets aside, he puts to the side in its own corral, all of the newborn animals, right? So all of the newborns of the flock, 3 times a year, are collected. And then in this corral, they exit the corral through one single opening. and they pass under the rod of the shepherd. And he marks every 10th animal with a red mark. And that animal, if it is fit to be brought, it's brought as an offering of the animal tithe. That's the animal tithe. And the Pesach, which we've been talking about. So the text juxtaposes all types of offerings mentioned in both verses with a peace offering. And what does that teach us? Indicating that just as one who sacrifices a peace offering is required to do so with the proper intent, both concerning deviation from the type of offering and concerning deviation with regard to the actual owner. And in addition, the law of proper intent is only as a mitzvah, but not as an indispensable requirement. So too in the case of any type of offering that must have proper intent, both concerning deviation from the offering and concerning deviation from the owner, the law of proper intent is only a mitzvah, meaning you're commanded to have the proper intent, but if you make a mistake, it remains fit. Therefore, the mitzvah ab initio is derived from the law of the peace offering, and those verses mentioned earlier repeat the law to teach that it is indispensable with regard to slaughter. And the juxtaposition of the peace offering with the Paschal offering indicates that a Paschal offering is similar to a peace offering in another respect. Just as with regard to a peace offering, you do not distinguish between slaughter and the other rites with regard to the mitzvah ab initio of proper intent, so too with regard to the Pesach, do not distinguish between slaughter and the other sacrificial rites with regard to the law that proper intent is indispensable, meaning no difference between ab initio and bedi'evet, after the fact. Right? So in other words, if you can still do it, even though you did it wrong, you're commanded to do it right, but if you did it wrong, you can still work with it. When it comes to the Pesach, no. If you got it wrong, whether you had the wrong intent with respect to owner or type of offering at the time of slaughter and at the time of all the other rites, end of that offering cannot move forward. Indispensable. The Gemara asks, rather, since the indispensability of proper intent with regard to the Pesach is derived from its juxtaposition with the peace offering, why do I need the term "it is" to be written in Exodus 12:27? What is derived from there? And the Gemara answers, this is written to teach that this requirement is indispensable only in the case of a Pesach, and not in the case of a guilt offering. As it is taught in a Baraisa concerning the Pesach, the term "it is" stated with regard to the slaughter in Exodus 12:27 to teach that intent of the owner is indispensable. But concerning a guilt offering, the term "it is" stated only after the verse mentions the burning of the sacrificial portions. And since the guilt offering itself is fit, even when its portions were not burned on the altar at all, intent for the sake of the owner at this point is certainly not indispensable, right? Again, since the key component of bringing any offering is the sprinkling of the blood, how you dispose of the meat sort of later in the process, there's a commandment, there's a right way to do it. And as we learned yesterday, if you do it wrong, you're not going to, achieve the atonement that you sought to achieve, a perfect atonement in God's eyes. But those matters are not indispensable to bringing the particular types of offerings. But in the case of the Pesach, which actually has fewer requirements, but those requirements are stringent indeed, right? As Bill said yesterday, C's don't get degrees. You need an A+ when it comes to the Pesach. Now, the Gemara asks, rather, since the... no, I did that. Okay. New subject. The Gemara asks, from where do we derive that if a sin offering is sacrificed for the sake of the wrong type of offering or one other than its owner, it is disqualified, right? So we're removing the sin offering, and I expressed some doubt about that in the last couple of days, but I should have remembered that that's the way it is in the Mishnah, and I went back and checked today, and that's where the halacha ended up, right? So the Pesach and the sin offering are the ones that are special in this regard, very stringent. If you have the wrong intent with regard to type of offering or owner, not only do they not fulfill the obligation of the owner, but they are not fit to continue their journey to the altar. So now we're going to prove why that is so with regard to the sin offering. So from where do we derive that if a sin offering is sacrificed for the sake of the wrong type of offering or one other than its owner, it is disqualified? And the Gemara answers, it is derived from this verse, as it is written, and slaughter it for a sin offering in Leviticus 4:33, teaching that the slaughter must be performed for the sake of a sin offering. And the Gemara asks, we found the source with regard to slaughter. From where do we derive this with regard to collection of the blood? And the Gemara answers, it is derived from this verse, as it is written, now page 8a, and the priest shall take of the blood of the sin offering, teaching that the collection of the blood must be performed for the sake of a sin offering. Now we're at the top of page 8a. I would like to just pause for 1 second and reflect a little bit on something. Sharon mentioned yesterday, I thought it was a very important point, that she holds by Rambam, by Maimonides, that the law of bringing sacrifices in the first and second temple and in the tabernacle before that. Why did God command that? God doesn't need these animals sacrificed to him. God is everywhere. We're in God. God doesn't need to eat these animals. God says it's a pleasing aroma to him when these animals are consumed in the fires of the altar. But Rashi teaches us the reason it's pleasing to Hashem is because he gave us a commandment and we followed it. That's what's pleasing about it. Okay, that the animal sacrifices were the way that ancient people worshipped. And so the idea was the Jews were being taught to worship not this pantheon of false gods, but the real God. But the manner of worship, for some period of historical time was going to be the manner of worship that people were familiar with, bringing animal sacrifices. And then eventually the temple was destroyed, and then the sacrifices were replaced with prayer, right? And prayer is obviously the sort of form of worship that we are much more familiar with today, and it makes sense to us. I'm just reflecting for a moment before we move on, because we're reading so many different rules and distinctions, the intent and the type of intent and the owner and the type of offering and the slaughter and the collection of the blood and the conveyance to the altar and the sprinkling on the altar and then the parts of the animal that are burned on the altar and the parts that are eaten by the priest and the parts of different kinds of offerings that are eaten by the owners, etc. And let's just take one moment to reflect on to imagine what it was like to bring an animal offering. We are so far removed, not only historically from what it was like to bring an animal offering, but in truth, it's a very small percentage of Americans, and I think of most people around the world, who live on a farm in touch with animals, right? So the number of people who've actually raised an animal and then, slaughtered it and butchered it just to eat it as part of maybe of a holiday dinner, or is just part of the way they eat. You slaughter a cow, that could feed a family of 4 for a long time, right? And especially in the modern age when we have freezers, months and months and months and months. But to us moderns, meat is just like comes in a styrofoam box with some cellophane wrapping. It's barely connected to a living, breathing animal, and certainly not one that we personally raised and watched grow, right? The ancients, the world that they lived in, everybody, even the people in the cities, were very familiar with the life of a shepherd, the life of a person who raises flocks, the life of a farmer who, among the crops that he's growing, also has animals that he feeds every day and that he's really in touch with. And so even if it wasn't your animal that was being brought, and most certainly if it was your animal, when the life of that animal is taken, and it is shechted with empathy and care to do it right, and then the blood drains out, which is to say the life drains out of the animal, and then that the life is conveyed to the altar and given as a gift to God. And they were sacrificing a significant portion of their income, of their estate, of their property. Right? Animals were really valuable. It meant a lot to bring an animal as an offering. All of which is to say this was an emotional moment You didn't just bring animal sacrifices and get through it and make sure you did it right. You made sure you did it right because this was very meaningful, right? And there was high drama as these things were being done. And certainly on Yom Kippur, when just, one animal, the goat that was slaughtered in this temple on behalf of the whole nation, like everyone's attention was on that goat and that sacrifice, which was being brought on behalf of the whole nation, even more than the bull, which the priest offered on that day, but to make an atonement for his own family and his fellow priests. So let's just imagine that for a second. That's this animal that you've had a relationship with, you've raised it from young, you walked it to Jerusalem, and now it goes to die. And there's they weren't vegetarians, right? It wasn't, they accepted, they never imagined that somebody would object to eating animals. That was not part of their world. But they were mindful of what a gift it was. That we had the opportunity to own animals and to slaughter them and to eat them and to live in a world where we could live at peace and bring these peace offerings. It was dramatic and it was emotional. Let's not lose sight of that when we go into the details. Okay. The Gemara asks, and we found a source for the law that the slaughter and collection must be performed for the sake of a sin offering. From where do we derive this law with regard to the sprinkling of the blood? And the Gemara answers, it is derived from a verse. As the verse states, and the priest shall make atonement for him concerning his sin. Leviticus 4:26, teaching that the atonement must be effected for the sake of a sin offering, as atonement is effected by the sprinkling of the blood. Okay. Getting very hot in here. Okay. So the Gemara asks, we found a source for the prohibition against a deviation from the type of offering. For the sin offering has to be for the right type of offering, or it's fully disqualified. From where do we derive the prohibition against deviation with regard to the owner? You have to have the right owner in mind. And the Gemara answers, the aforementioned verse states, and the priest shall make atonement for him, indicating that the intent must be for him and not for some other person. The Gemara asks, we found the source for the mitzvah, the commandment to sprinkle the blood for the sake of the owner, ab initio. Got to do it the right way. That's the right way. From where do we derive that this is indispensable and disqualifies the offering if it is not fulfilled? Not just that we're commanded to do it the right way, but if we do it the wrong way, full stop, animal disqualified. How do we know that? And the Gemara answers, it is as Ravina, the son of Rabbi Yehoshua, says with regard to the sin offering of a Nazir, one who vows to abstain from the products of the grapevine and will not cut his hair and will not become impure for the dead by going into a cemetery attending a funeral during the period of his Nazirus, like Samson was for his whole life. The Gemara answers, it is as Ravina, the son of Rabbi Yehoshua, says with regard to the sin offering of a Nazir. When he completes his Nazirus, he brings several offerings, including a sin offering. Since the verse could have simply stated sin offering, but instead stated his sin offering, it is inferred that the offering must be sacrificed for his, the owner's sake. Here too, since the verse could have simply stated sin, but it states his sin, one infers that if the blood of the sin offering is not sprinkled for the sake of its owner, it is disqualified. That's why you can't bring the sin offering, even though it won't fulfill the obligation. You don't complete the sin offering that you started like you would with a burnt offering. The Gemara asks, we found a source for the mitzvah sacrificing a sin offering without deviation from the type of offering ab initio, and with regard to the sprinkling of its blood without deviation with regard to the owner, concerning both its mitzvah ab initio and its indispensability. Good summary of where we've come. From where do we derive that performing all the sacrificial rites beyond the sprinkling and the slaughter, without deviation from the type of offering is indispensable, and that performing all other rites besides sprinkling the blood without deviation with regard to the owner is both a mitzvah ab initio and indispensable? This seems to suggest that, okay, he brought a sin offering. At the time that it was slaughtered, proper intent, a sin offering for this actual owner. Collect the blood. At the time of sprinkling, they made a mistake. They thought it was the blood of a different sin offering or a different owner. Wrong intent. Then what? Right? So now it certainly hasn't fulfilled his obligation. But what is left? Well, what's left is a sin offering, right? There are parts that are consumed by the altar and parts that are eaten by the priests. We don't do that now because we've deviated from what was necessary in any one of the rites, and so we cut off that offering in its process. Rabbi Yonah says, how do we know that? It is derived from the law concerning the sin offering of a Nazir, as it is written concerning a Nazir, and the priest shall bring them before the Lord, and shall offer ve'asa, his sin offering and his burnt offering. The verse teaches that all of its sacrificial actions, asiyotav, must be performed for the sake of a sin offering, all the elements of the ritual. And the Gemara asks, we found a source for the law that a sin offering must be sacrificed without deviation from the type of offering, and that this requirement is indispensable to all the aspects of the ritual. From where do we derive that sacrificing it without deviation with regard to the owner, having the correct owner in mind, is also indispensable, even in rites other than the sprinkling of the blood? And Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, says, since the verse concerning a Nazir could have simply stated sin offering, but instead states his sin offering, one infers that the offering must be sacrificed for the owner's sake. But Ravina says, whoa. Who's Ravina, by the way? Ravina and Rav Ashi are to the Gemara as Rebbe is to the Mishnah. They were the ultimate editors of what is and is not in the Gemara, though they are a little bit less, forward in that role. Rebbe for sure supervised the redaction of the Mishnah. We know that Ravina and Rav Ashi did that, but they're quieter about their role in doing that, and they're also sages in their own right who have teachings recorded in the Gemara. Ravina objects to this. If that is so, what do you interpret from the fact that the same verse could have stated burnt offering, but instead states his burnt offering? And the Gemara asks, and according to Ravina, what do you interpret from the subsequent verse? The priest shall offer also his meal offering and his libation. So why does Ravina not mention that this verse could have stated meal offering and instead says his meal offering, and that it could have stated libation but instead says his libation? Why are we only going to talk about his burnt offering and compared to where it could have said, where it said burnt offering, it's not his burnt offering? So the Gemara answers that, it could have just said burnt offering, but it says his burnt offering. Why is he comparing that to sin offering and his sin offering, but he doesn't raise the same question about the meal offering and the libation? So the Gemara answers that language is necessary. It is just like the phrase, their meal offering and their libations, which is mentioned many times in the portion of the festival offerings. For example, in Numbers 29:37. It teaches that the meal offerings and the libations that are brought with the additional animal offerings of the festivals can be sacrificed even at night after the offering is brought. Doesn't have to be during the day, like the sprinkling of the blood and the slaughter, which do have to be done during the day. Likewise, and the phrase their meal offerings and their libations also teaches that they may be brought even on the following day. And likewise here, when stated with regard to a Nazir, the phrase teaches that they may be brought at night or the day after the offering is sacrificed, these kinds of ancillary offerings, the meal offering, the libation. But there remains a difficulty. What do you interpret from the fact that the verse could have stated burnt offering, but instead states his burnt offering? Okay, so we understand why he said this one and not those, but what is it that he's learning out from burnt offering versus his burnt offering? So the Gemara raised an additional objection to the derivation from a Nazir. And furthermore, can the laws of a standard sin offering and of the sin offering of a Nazir be derived from one another? They're very different. What's the big difference? When do we bring a chatas? Because you unwittingly violated a negative prohibition. You committed a sin through some kind of carelessness, right? It's unwitting, you didn't do it on purpose, but you came to eat something that was prohibited as a typical example, and now you become obligated to bring a chatas. What's different between that and the chatas that a Nazir brings at the end of his days of Nazirus to effect his purification and so that he can return to drinking wine and eating other products of the vine? What's different is that the Nazir didn't sin, right? It's just that the Torah says that as part of his final offerings, when he finishes Nazirus, he brings a sin offering and a burnt offering and I believe a peace offering. But that's different, very different intent, reason, situation. And furthermore, can the laws of the standard sin offering and the sin offering of a Nazir be derived from one another? The laws of a sin offering brought for a transgression, for example, eating forbidden fat, cannot be derived from the laws of the sin offering of a Nazir due to the unique element of stringency of the latter. The sin offering of the Nazir is even more stringent. Why? Since there is no blood, i.e., other offerings are brought with it, right? It's not to atone for a transgression. It's part of a group of offerings. Likewise, the laws of a Nazir's sin offering cannot be derived from the laws of the sin offering brought for eating forbidden fat due to the unique element of the stringency of the law of the chatas for eating forbidden fat, since it atones for a transgression that was punishable by kares. Right? There was no sin that would be punishable by kares if you did it intentionally in the case of the Nazir. So they each have stringencies that the other ones don't have. Therefore, we're not free to extend the elements of the chatas of the sinner to the chatas of the Nazir. Therefore, rather, Rava says these laws are derived from the law of the sin offering of a mitzorah, another kind of purification process, which at least is involved with some kind of transgression, since he got tsaras, that physical expression of a spiritual malady, because he committed some kind of a sin, probably lashon hara, evil speech. As it is written, and the priest shall offer the sin offering, teaching that all sacrificial actions of a sin offering must be performed for the sake of a sin offering. And we found a source for the law that a sin offering must be sacrificed without deviation from the type of offering, and that it is indispensable. From where do we derive that sacrificing a sin offering without deviation with regard to the owner is also indispensable? And the verse states, and make atonement for the one that is to be purified of his impurity, in the case of the mitzorah, indicating that the sin offering must be sacrificed for the sake of this person who is being purified, and not for some other mitzorah who needs to be purified, or somebody, or a Nazir that needs to be purified for that matter. And the Gemara asks, but still, can the laws of a standard sin offering and the sin offering of a mitzorah be derived from one another? Again, we're going to have separate stringencies that don't apply to the other. The laws of a sin offering brought for eating forbidden fat cannot be derived from the laws of the sin offering of the mitzorah, since there is other blood that is brought with the latter, i.e., a burnt offering and a guilt offering. And the laws of the mitzorah cannot be derived from the laws of the sin offering for eating forbidden fat, since that offering also atones for it, because that sin offering is brought for a transgression that, if done intentionally, would result in kares. The Gemara answers, indeed, the laws of a sin offering cannot be derived from the laws of one other type of sin offering alone. But, as we've seen before, we could derive the laws of one type of sin offering from the laws of the other two. If we could look at what is common to, I guess, the sin offering of the mitzorah and the sin offering of the Nazir, then perhaps as a pair, we could extend those laws over to the one who is bringing a chatas for eating something prohibited, chelev, forbidden fat. Or maybe we could look at the laws of what's in common between the one who ate forbidden fat and the Nazir, and we could extend those laws to the mitzorah. Which legs of this triangle are we going to use? Let's see. The verses concerning a standard sin offering, that of the mitzorah and that of the Nazir, all contain elements that indicate that the offering must be sacrificed for its own sake. Two of them together are sufficient to teach that this law applies to the third case, would be the theory. So the third case is therefore apparently extraneous, and it is understood to teach that proper intent in this regard is indispensable for all of the rites of the offering, not just the slaughter and sprinkling. The Gemara asks, with regard to which type of sin offering should the Torah not have written this law, i.e., which of the three cases should be regarded as the extraneous case, which comes to teach that all of the aspects of the ritual need to have with correct intent, right? We're learning that out from the fact that there is a third case. If there had only been two cases, we would only see what's common to them, but we couldn't have derived this idea that all of the elements of the ritual must be with correct intent with respect to type of offering and owner, right? The fact that there's an extraneous third case teaches us that. But is one of these cases extraneous? And if so, which one? If you say, let the merciful one not write it with regard to a sin offering brought for chelev, forbidden fat, then one can derive it from these other sin offerings, i.e. those of the Nazir and the Mitzorah. But this could be refuted. What is notable about these other sin offerings? They are notable in that there is other blood. They are brought as a group of offerings. Not so with the chatas for chelev. And if you say, let the merciful one not write it with regard to the chatas of the Nazir, and one can derive it from these other sin offerings, those of the Mitzorah and those of the sinner who ate chelev, this can also be refuted. What is notable about these other sin offerings? They are notable in that one does not have the option of obtaining an exemption through a request to a halakhic authority. A Nazir, by contrast, can request of a halakhic authority to dissolve his vows of Nazirus, thereby nullifying his obligation. By the way, just this morning, we had the ritual, which we do on the morning of Erev Shabbos, to have all our vows nullified. Vows that we undertook or mistakenly undertook in the past year and that we will undertake in the coming year. We recite this whole formula in front of a Beis Din, right? Three of our peers, it doesn't have to be halakhic authorities, great rabbis. It just has to be from Yidden, right? Shomer Shabbos Yidden, who face you, and then after you recite that you don't want to, you hereby regret that you undertook any of these vows and regret that any of the vows you'll undertake by mistake in the coming year, and then they absolve you of them. That's a ritual that we actually just did this morning. Okay, if you say, so the point is that the vow of Nazirus, you can get out of it by having it annulled, but if you've become a Mitzorah, they can't annul your obligation. And if you've eaten chelev, well, you ate chelev, now you're obligated to bring a chatas, and a court can't get you out of it. If you say, let the merciful one not write it with regard to the sin offering of the Mitzorah, then one can derive it from these other sin offerings, those of the Nazir and the sinner. We can refute it. What is notable about these other sin offerings? They are notable in that they cannot be brought from doves instead of sheep if the owner is poor. But the Mitzorah, that's a variable offering. He can bring doves if he's too poor to bring a sheep. Therefore, the laws of these different sin offerings cannot be derived from one another. Rather, the law is derived from that which the verse states. This is the law of the burnt offering, the meal offering, the sin offering, the guilt offering, the consecration offering, and the sacrifice of peace offerings. And the verse juxtaposes a sin offering with a peace offering, indicating that just as for a peace offering we require intent for its sake as a mitzvah ab initio, both concerning the deviation from the type of offering and concerning deviation with regard to the owner, so too for a sin offering we require intent for its sake as a mitzvah, both concerning deviation from the type of offering and concerning deviation with regard to the owner. Now, what's interesting about this is that that's how you know you're commanded to have the correct intent at all the different steps of the sin offering, both with respect to type of offering and identity of the owner, for the slaughter, collection of the blood, conveying the blood, sprinkling the blood, burning on the altar, eaten by the priest. You have to have the correct intent all the way. And we're deriving that from the law of the peace offering. But the peace offering doesn't get canceled and rendered unfit if you have that wrong intent. The sin offering does. So is it okay to derive the necessity ab initio from an offering that doesn't have that extra consequence of the offering is unfit, like the sin offering does? Apparently, yes. Therefore, the mitzvah ab initio, right, that you are commanded ab initio to do it the right way, is derived from the law of the peace offering. And those verses mentioned earlier, from which the requirement is derived with regard to each type of sin offering separately, repeat the law to teach what? That in the case of the sin offering, if you get the intent wrong, it's rendered unfit and it doesn't complete its journey to the altar. The Gemara asks, and we found a source for these laws with regard to a sin offering brought for eating chaylev, forbidden fat, as it is with regard to it, and slaughter it for a sin offering, Leviticus 4:33, indicating that it must be slaughtered for the sake of a sin offering. And likewise, sources for this law with regard to the sin offerings of a Nazir and a Mitzorah have also been cited. Now we're on page 8b. From where do we derive these laws with regard to a sin offering brought for idolatry? Remember, the prohibitions of idolatry, right, as we learn in the Tractate of Avodah Zarah, are very stringent indeed. All kinds of stringencies associated with that sin beyond the requirements of not doing the sin and atonement if you did do the sin, of other kinds of prohibitions. So, does this all work when when instead of eating a forbidden fat, we're talking about idolatry? Sounds like Kal v'chomer, any stringency that we're going to apply to somebody who violated the prohibition on eating forbidden fat, of course we would apply those stringencies to somebody who violated laws of Avodah Zarah. Don't we? Let's keep reading. From where we derive that these laws with regard to a sin offering brought for idolatry, which has unique laws, as detailed in Numbers 15, 27 through 31, and with regard to which the term for a sin offering is not written. And likewise, from where do we derive that with regard to the sin offerings that are brought for the hearing of the voice and for the utterance of the lips and for the defiling of the temple or its sacrificial foods, which also have unique laws? Somebody who swore falsely in court, or somebody who was tameh when he walked into the temple, the holy temple in Jerusalem. And with regard to which the term for a sin offering is not written either. Right? Those are negative prohibitions that we do bring offerings if we violate them unwittingly, but it doesn't say the words sin offering. Is it a sin offering? Is it a guilt offering? Maybe it is a sin offering, but these are unique laws outside the realm of other prohibitions. So the Gemara answers, with regard to a sin offering brought for idolatry, these laws are derived from the laws of the sin offering brought for eating forbidden fat, as idolatry is also punishable by kares, death at the hands of the heavenly court, similar to consumption of chaylev. And with regard to all these other sin offerings which are brought for transgressions not punishable by kares, these laws are derived by analogy from the common element of the aforementioned three sources, namely a standard sin offering, the sin offering of the Nazir, and the sin offering of a Mitzorah. If we are talking about sin offerings, even though the sin offering language itself is not present at the time of the prohibition is stated, nevertheless, it is a sin offering being brought, and these laws will apply. New subject. The sages taught when a Paschal offering, a Pesach, is sacrificed at its appointed time, right? On Erev Pesach, after noon, if it is sacrificed for its sake, it is fit. If it is sacrificed not for its sake, it is unfit, as stated in the Mishnah. We've said that many times now. And when an offering is consecrated as a Pesach, and when an offering that is consecrated as a Pesach is sacrificed during the rest of the days of the year, you set aside this animal to be a Pesach, and you didn't slaughter on the afternoon of Erev Pesach, right? The afternoon before Pesach begins that night. So can you slaughter it on another day? Yes, but if on another day you call it a Pesach, then it is unfit. And when an offering that is consecrated as a Pesach is sacrificed during the rest of the days of the year, if it is sacrificed for its sake, meaning as a Pesach, then it's unfit because you didn't bring it at the right time. The Pesach has that special requirement not only for the sake of a Pesach and for the sake of the correct owner, but also in its time, on the afternoon of Passover, before Passover begins at night. If you don't have all three, unfit, can't do anything with it, can't eat it. But if it is sacrificed not for its sake, then it is fit. As we saw before, a Pesach, an animal that you designate to be a Pesach, if you want to bring it and then you didn't bring it on that day, you can bring it on another day, but you don't call it a Pesach. Now it's a shalom, a peace offering, and then it is fit. So the Gemara presents a mnemonic for the names of the Amoraim mentioned in this discussion. Shin Lamed Vav, Kuf Beis Aleph, Yud Sadi Nun, Mem Mem He, Reish Beit Sadi, Aleph Beis He, Aleph. So the Gemara asks from where are these matters derived, i.e. that if a Pesach is sacrificed during the rest of the year, it is fit, if sacrificed not for its sake. Shmuel's father says, the verse states, and if his offering for a sacrifice of peace offerings unto the Lord is of the flock, indicating that an offering that is brought only from the flock will be a sacrifice of peace offerings, and the Pesach fulfills this criterion, right? A Pesach can become a shalom. The Gemara challenges this, say that if it is sacrificed for the sake of a shalom, yes, it is fit. But if it is sacrificed for the sake of some other offering, it is not fit. Rabbi Illa says that Rabbi Yochanan says the redundant expression for a sacrifice in Leviticus 3:6 is stated to include any type of sacrifice. This sounds like a Pesach could become an Ola, an elevation offering. Again, it won't satisfy his obligation to bring the Pesach because he didn't bring it in its time. If he has to bring an Ola, if he has an obligatory Ola, can this Pesach satisfy that? I don't know. The Gemara asks, if so, say that a Pesach should be rendered as any offering for which one slaughters it. For example, if it is slaughtered for the sake of an Ola, a burnt offering, it should be rendered a burnt offering. And the Gemara answers, if the phrase for peace offerings and a sacrifice was written in the verse, it would be as you say. Now that it is written for a sacrifice of peace offerings, this indicates that for whatever type of offering one slaughters it, it will be a peace offering. So it was a Pesach, you didn't offer it in its time, you're going to bring it at another time of the year. Maybe you owe an Ola, not going to, even if you call it an Ola, not going to be an Ola. It's going to be a Shlom. You're going to get credit for bringing a peace offering, but if you're obligated to bring an Ola, not going to satisfy that obligation. The Gemara challenges this by saying, say that for a sacrifice is a generalization, and of peace offerings is a detail. And according to the principles of biblical hermeneutics, wherever there is a generalization and a detail, this tells you that the generalization includes only that which is specified in the detail. So in this case, if the offering is sacrificed for the sake of a peace offering, yes, it is fit. But if it is sacrificed for the sake of another offering, it is not fit. So this Pesach that you're going to bring at another time of the year, if you call it a Shalomim, works. If you call it an Ola, doesn't work, stop the process, according to this view. The Gemara answers this challenge by saying, with the term unto the Lord, the verse then generalized again. Therefore, the verse is formulated as a generalization, detailed generalization. And now the Gemara will explain what that means. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. Rav Yaakov of Nehar Pekod objects to this suggestion, but the latter generalization is dissimilar to the former generalization. The former generalization for a sacrifice includes only slaughtered offerings and nothing more, whereas the latter generalization unto the Lord, this includes any offering unto the Lord, not just animals, right? This could also include meal offerings or libations. loaves. For me to get the questions, I have to sign in again. To sign in again, I have to open the YouTube app on my phone and approve this. Yes, it's me. Okay. Unto the Lord includes any offerings unto the Lord. And accordingly, even if the Pesach offering was sacrificed for the sake of burnt offerings or even for the sake of meal offerings, it should be fit, as these are brought unto the Lord. And the Gemara responds to this objection by saying the school of Rabbi Yishmael taught generalizations and details even in examples like this case. And the Gemara explains, since unto the Lord is a second generalization, the verse is formulated as a generalization and a detail and a generalization. And you may deduce that the verse is referring only to items similar to the detail. Just as the items mentioned in the detail are clearly defined as a case where a Pesach was sacrificed not for its own sake, and nevertheless it is fit because it was not sacrificed in its time, so too in any case where it was sacrificed not for its sake but for the sake of another offering, it is fit. So the Gemara asks, if the verse is referring only to actions similar to the detail, then just as the items mentioned in the detail are clearly defined as a peace offering, which is a matter that is brought as a vow offering or as a gift offering, so too a Pesach should be fit only if it was sacrificed for the sake of any offering that can be brought as either a vow offering or a gift offering. Accordingly, if it was sacrificed for the sake of a burnt offering or a peace offering, both of which can either be brought as a subject of a vow or because you want to, without vowing in advance, yes, it is fit. But if it was sacrificed for the sake of a sin offering or a guilt offering, it is not fit, as these are not brought as a vow offering or a gift offering. So the Gemara therefore rejects this whole exegetical method of generalizations and details in this situation and switches instead to the method of amplifications and restrictions. So rather, the term for a sacrifice, not a generalization, rather it's an amplification, which includes any type of offering. Therefore, if a Pesach offering is sacrificed for the sake of any type of offering during the rest of the year, it is fit. And the Gemara challenges that by saying, well, if so, say that it adds that a Pesach should be rendered as any offering for which one slaughters it. Why does Shmuel's father interpret that it is rendered a peace offering specifically? Tune in Thursday. When we come back from Rosh Hashanah, at the regular time, we'll teach on Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific. We're not having class, right? Tomorrow, Rosh Hashanah. And Wednesday, Rosh Hashanah. Thursday, not Rosh Hashanah anymore. It is the fast of Gedalia. So we'll be fasting at the time that we're teaching the class. Going to be strong with God's help and make it work. Okay. On Zevachim 8, seeing a question from Sharon. Can a Pesach be offered on Pesach Sheni, if not offered for its sake on Pesach proper? I was thinking about that same question, right? Okay, so we can, if we didn't offer it on Pesach, then we could offer it as something else during the rest of the year, not a Pesach. What about Pesach Sheni? What's the purpose of Pesach Sheni? That's because some people were too far away, beyond their control. They couldn't get to Jerusalem in time for Pesach. Or they were tameh, and therefore couldn't bring the Pesach. And this was a question that was asked of Moses in the wilderness by guys who were tameh with tumas mace, right? Impurity by virtue of being in contact with the dead. And we have a midrash that says, why were they doing that? Because they were doing something incredibly holy, super holy work. They were carrying the bones of Joseph HaTzadik, right? Joseph, the brother who was sold into slavery in Egypt and ended up becoming the second in command in the most powerful nation on earth, and fed the whole world during the famine, and then invited his brothers to come and live in Egypt, and that's how we ended up in Egypt. Joseph, and who made his brothers swear that when he was buried, that they would take his bones out of Egypt and bury them in the Holy Land. So when the Jews left Egypt, there were a few guys who were carrying the bones of Joseph. So they're in contact with a corpse, right? The bones of a corpse. So therefore, they're tameh, and they can't bring the Pesach. So they said, but, we want to bring the Pesach. It's not our fault. And so Moses checked with God, and then they instituted Pesach Sheni 1 month later. So Sharon's question is excellent. Okay, we didn't bring the Pesach in its time on Pesach. Can we bring that same animal on Pesach Sheni? Sounds like it should work, but I'm not sure. And I don't know the answer offhand. I suspect we're going to come to it. That's what I've got for us today. May everybody be blessed with such a sweet new year. We should hear good news. We should hear news of peace. Please, God, let this war end with a secure and lasting peace for Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, and Am Yisrael, the people of Israel. And let that peace extend to the whole world. May it be a year of joy, of truth, of uplift, of meaning, of prosperity, of success, of getting nachas from our children and grandchildren if we have them, and giving them nachas, and all good things. And we say Amen. All the best. Shana Tova. May you be written and inscribed for a good and sweet new year.